Well, there is a serious migrant crisis growing at the border. And so we're going to dissect exactly what has happened. How did we get to this point? But as of right now, it is looking like we're seeing double the numbers of migrants that might be attempting to come into the United States than even the height of the Trump administration. And the thing is, the Trump administration saw double the numbers as well. So we're now seeing quadruple the numbers from the migrants that were showing up at the border under the Obama administration. So the numbers are critical. It is looking like this year we're going to see maybe 160,000. They were saying actually the number was for children showing up unaccompanied. I believe that the number I read today was 453 on average showing up daily. That would bring in, I believe when I did the math on that was 150,000 roughly. Let's see, 453. Yeah, about 165,000 children, unaccompanied minors showing up at the border this year is what they're anticipating. Now, at the height of the Trump administration, that was something like 75,000 children. So this is nearly double showing up at the border. And in previous years, under the Obama administration, it'd be something like 40,000 a year, 30 to 40,000 a year. So we are seeing massive increases of migrants showing up at the southern border. And many of the news outlets are going to tell you that, well, the reason is because Biden has open border policies, right? We're hearing this from especially the right-wing news outlets. And even the left-wing news outlets are sort of starting to indicate that, well, this is because Biden has reversed a lot of Trump's migrant policies. And this has essentially been sort of like a welcome flag to the migrants. And that's why they're showing up at the border. But that's only partially true. Now, I don't want to gloss over the fact that Biden's reversal of many of these migrant policies isn't contributing, because I think it absolutely is. One thing that Trump had negotiated during his time in office was the Remain in Mexico policy. So he negotiated with Mexico that, listen, if these people show up at our border, and these people are from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, they're from the Northern Triangle region of Central America. So he says, look, if they're showing up in Mexico and they're escaping violence in Honduras, they're in Mexico now, they're safe. So they need to remain in Mexico while they apply for asylum in the United States, and we go through their case and we make a decision on that. Rather than them coming into the United States, we put them in a facility, and then you can only keep them in the facility for so long, and then you've got to release them into the general public and then hope that they come back for their court date to find out whether or not they can stay in the country. Many of them do not show back up. Obviously, they go into the country and then they say, whoa, I don't want to go back. Because they're going to deport me. So I'd rather just risk it and hope I don't get caught. Well, Trump negotiated that deal with Mexico. Mexico obviously threw a lot of strong arming on the Trump administration's part, saying that they were threatening them with tariffs. They were threatening them with, making trade very difficult. Mexico relented and agreed to that. Well, Biden has reversed that policy. So that meant a lot of migrants felt like, okay, then we can show up and they're going to let us in. Biden also, was saying that unaccompanied minors would be let in. The Trump administration was turning a lot of them away or keeping them in Mexico. And Biden has announced paths to citizenship that are more relaxed. Biden has changed the asylum seeking laws, saying that there are certain other conditions that allow for asylum. And many of those conditions allow for those in those regions of that Northern Triangle that is very hostile. They're able to then apply for asylum in the United States. Typically, traditionally, those who are coming from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, their definition, when they come to the border and they say, I'm seeking asylum, I'm coming from these countries with high gang violence, my life is in danger, that doesn't actually technically qualify as asylum according to our actual in the books asylum laws. So that is why Biden had to change them in order to include provisions for people coming from that Northern Triangle. We have very specific asylum, it's political asylum, refugee from, or people who are seeking asylum from certain identifying prosecutions. So it's a personal identifier that is causing them to be persecuted and they're seeking asylum in the United States. These people in the Northern Triangle of Central America are fleeing violence as a whole. So it's not that they personally, individually are being hunted down because the government of Guatemala wants them because they've done something against the government. It's not that. It's that they feel overall that they're living in a violent environment and that they want to get out. And by the way, that violent environment is very violent. Down in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, the murder rate is about 66 murders per 100,000 people. Here in the United States, it's about 4 per 100,000 people. So you're looking at more than 10 times, almost 20 times the murder rate. The gang violence in the Northern Triangle is so bad that Guatemala has actually indicated that they believe 100% of their small private-owned businesses are being extorted by gangs. 100% of them. And it is so bad that it's not that they just come to you and they say, look, you either pay up or we're going to smash you with, smash your business up or burn it down. No, what these gangs do is they go to these business owners and they say, you either pay up or we're going to kill you tomorrow, or worse, we're going to come and we're going to bring a gang and we're going to rape your daughter in front of you. It's really bad. It's horrible stuff. Sorry, I should have given you a little bit of a warning, I think, on the content of this segment. But these gangs are extremely violent. They will kidnap children from people that are not doing what the gang wants. They'll kidnap children to bring them to the border, to use them as a means to try to get into the United States. They will go to families and say, give us your daughters so that we can do what we want with them, or you all die. It's a very violent gang environment. It's not just your... we're selling some drugs, we're going to beat some people up. It's way worse than that. And they've grown very powerful. It's to the point where the police and the military many of them are corrupted. They're not helping the people out at all. So it's just this really terrible environment that people are wanting to escape. But a lot of it is, why is it that way? And why is this Northern Triangle having this issue in the first place? And a lot of that blame comes squarely down on the United States and Spain. A lot of it goes down to the European colonization and also the United States, the banana republics, and our absolute obsession of the Cold War era and stopping the expansion of communism at all costs, including the cost of demolishing democracy in favor of authoritarian governments that were corrupted. So the history there, in order to understand how did these countries get so bad and why now are they showing up to our border in droves, we do need to understand that after the Spanish were no longer in the area, these countries started to gain their own autonomy. The United States kind of found new ways to go in there and sort of not colonize, but essentially take control of the resources of the region, if you've heard of the banana republics. So that area was very much the banana republic. The United Fruit Company went down there and started setting up shop, and there was a lot of money in it. And they had a lot of sway over the government. They had a lot of sway over the politics, a lot of sway over what was going on in the region. And when workers would rise up and attempt to strike and fight the United Fruit Company for lack of humanitarian, for poor humanitarian conditions, low wages and whatnot, the United Fruit Company actually had so much power that they were able to turn the military of those governments on the people and slaughter the protesters, slaughter the strikers. It was actually called the Banana Massacres. It was a real thing that happened. And so the money, which we all know, we're beholden to a lot of money here in the United States. The money was really controlling the region. It was the United Fruit Company that was really controlling that region quite a bit and the money in that region. And through time, the people started to rise up more and more, and there were these the people wanted to really gain democracy. And a lot of those uprisings were backed by sort of communist ideals, or once you got into the 50s, definitely backed by the Soviets. And the United States was so completely obsessed with stopping the Soviet expansion, and they believed that this was a threat to the sovereignty of the United States, that the Soviets were backing countries down in South America and Central America, that the United States did everything that the U.S. could do to stop the rise of these these Soviet-backed governments. And so the United States pretty much has attempted a coup or has successfully enacted a coup in nearly every single country of South and Central America at this point. The United States has meddled heavily, sometimes subvertly, sometimes overtly, in the entire region. But particularly, this started really in the 1950s. The United States actually helped overthrow the Guatemalan democratically elected government, throwing them into a near 40-year civil war. This caused complete crisis in Guatemala. Absolute, if you're in war for that long, we see what's going on in Syria now marks the 10 years of the Syrian civil war, and we're seeing how Syria is. So imagine a civil war like that going on for 30 years. It is devastating to a country, and it creates mass poverty. And this had gone on throughout the region. And the United States was obsessed with this from the 50s all the way through Ronald Reagan, through the 80s, just obsessed with this Cold War expansion of the U.S., of the Soviets, wanting to stop it at all costs. And it didn't matter what sort of humanitarian issues we threw the people into. The fact that we were forcing them to live under a dictatorship or authoritarians, that we were helping overthrow their democratically elected governments. We didn't care about that. We didn't care that the people were suffering from humanitarian conditions. No, nobody cared about that. It was all about stopping the Soviets, an absolute unhealthy obsession. And so all the way up until the 90s, these countries were essentially very unstable and at war. And obviously, through a period of time, that is going to run its course on a country and the people, and it's only going to get more and more corrupt. In the very beginning, when democracy falls, things don't typically go to the worst spot possible right away. It usually takes years and years for it to unravel to that point, because there's always these sort of power struggles, and one group thinks they're going to get in, and people are supporting that group, and they're thinking that they're going to have some power and maybe some order in the place. But it takes decades for really civil order to really crumble and demolish. And that's really where the Northern Triangle is at this point. Is they're at a point where you've got these ongoing destruction of their ability to govern themselves, a propping up of aristocrats, oligarchs, and the wealthy, which has contributed to a secondary problem in that region, which is that the rich want to stay rich. We see that in our own country, right? The rich want to stay rich. They don't want to give up their power. They don't want to give up their wealth. So one of the big problems they're having down in that Northern Triangle is it's one of the lowest taxed places. They don't have very many taxes at all that funnel to the government that then can be distributed to the people. So the people are really, really poor because there's a lot of pushback against taxation. The rich, the aristocrats, the oligarchs, they don't want the taxation. So they push back, they control the government, and there's very, very low taxes there. It's something like 12%. It's just not enough to then take that money and distribute it to the rest of the poor people in those countries. So they're fighting this mentality, they fought the imperial, sort of our own neo-colonization sort of tactics of siphoning resources or installing governments that were friendly to the U.S. and hostile to the Soviets. We played that game for a long time. And doing that, we had to support really bad people. We had to support bad governments. We had to support corrupted, crooked politicians, aristocrats, oligarchs, all of that. And now the people are under the thumb of those very people that we've helped support. And those very people do not want to distribute the wealth in a way that is going to support the poor people. So what happens is this breeds crime. The poor people are so poor, they're unskilled, they're not educated. The coffee market kind of fluctuates. Sometimes the coffee market's good, sometimes it's bad, leaving a lot of unskilled workers with no jobs. They then have to go into the cities where they don't have any real opportunity, and a lot of them turn to gangs for survival. And they become ruthless. And then we see this sort of cycle going on and on and on. That lack of taxation, lack of education, lack of opportunity, lack of resources creates this criminal organization, a criminal mentality amongst them, where they're thinking, I got to protect myself and I got to protect my family, and I guess this is the way we do it. It's you or me. And that's the survival tactic. So in the 90s, the majority of the people that were coming into the United States were from Mexico. We saw a lot of single males coming into Mexico. That was the vast majority of those showing up at our southern border. And they were younger men looking for work. And you know what? We needed them, right? We needed the work. So they came in, they found jobs as migrant farmers, migrant workers. They were working in our industries, and we know the type, right? We've seen this for years. And that was who was mostly showing up at a southern border. But now it's very few are these Mexican single younger guys ready to work. Those are not the people showing up at our border. And quite frankly, those people actually helped support and build our country. So as much as people demonize these Mexican migrants coming in, these younger men, strong men, working men wanting to come in, I mean, those were really helpful people to have immigrating into the country. You need people who are going to work the farms. You need people who are going to be doing all that labor. And these young, strong, healthy, motivated men were coming in willing to do those jobs. But now that's not what we're seeing. So now we're seeing instead different groups of people. And one big group of those people is unaccompanied minors, children. And we have to then ask ourselves, what happens when we let them into the country? It is a matter of obviously humanitarian. You cannot leave a child just stranded, standing there at the border. That's terrible. I don't think any of us think that that's a good idea. But at the same time, you're bringing in these children who have no parents, and they're coming in. And then what do? We release them into the system of what? Foster care. And then these kids grow up without parents. And then we have to ask, what kind of contribution do they make to our society in this way? It's different than DACA kids. A lot of those kids came in with parents, and they just happened to be very young. Their parents brought them over. They were with their families. They were raised by their families. That is a bit different than the crisis we're seeing at our border today. Right now, what we're seeing are unaccompanied minors who are not showing up with their families. These are not the hardworking, strong Mexican men, motivated, willing to work. These are instead scared children who have been either sent up there by their parents who said, I would rather send you away for a better life than have you live like this where we're living. Or some of them have been kidnapped and they're being used as a weapon in order to get into the United States in a way. And I know a lot of people can't understand the mentality of how could a parent send their kid away? But, we in the United States live a very privileged life, and we don't have to think much about that. But I can tell you in my family, this did happen. This happened to my cousin. This is something that hits close to home. My family dealt with this when they were leaving Vietnam. My aunt needed to stay behind because my uncle was still fighting in the war. But my family was leaving, and she had a 4-year-old daughter. And she decided that it would be best for her daughter to go with the family and to leave. And it tore her heart out to send her 4-year-old daughter away, my cousin. It tore her heart out. But she thought, this might be better for her to go with the family. I've got to stay behind. My aunt stayed behind. She was the oldest in the family to stay back, wait for her husband who was in the war, who, by the way, was killed. So she was stuck there by herself. But also, there was a chance they thought that the war would still go into the favor of the South and the Americans, and the family wouldn't lose everything, their houses and all of that stuff. So she stayed back to kind of manage the family business and the house, and hoping that maybe the outcome of the war would be different. And it wasn't. And she got stuck, and her husband was killed, and her daughter was gone. And that's my aunt. That's my cousin. So I understand why family would do this. It is a difficult decision to make. It is definitely not easy. It pains a family for decades. It causes trauma for decades with many involved, that the child and the parent and whoever was sent to take them or whoever ended up raising them. It causes a lot of drama. But it is something that most Americans never have to even fathom or think about. But it is a reality for many people around the world. They would rather never see their child again, potentially, but know that their child has a better chance at a better life if they do that. So we got all these kids showing up at the border, and it is a lot of that is the United States and our history. Now, there's been times where this has been brought up. I know it was brought up a lot during the Obama administration, and he kind of said, you know what? I don't want to talk about the past. Let's talk about the future. I understand that sentiment too. You know, it's like, okay, look, it is what it is. I'm not the one who did it. Somebody, you know, it was done in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. But now here we are, and now we've got the problem. So what are we going to do to help these countries? And I think, you know, it is something that has to be addressed. It is something that has to be talked more about. We can't just blame these migrant crises. Because remember, under Trump, now Trump was no friend to migrants. He didn't have any sort of rhetoric that made anybody believe by any stretch of any imagination that he was friendly to people coming up to our southern border. Yet under the Trump administration, we saw double the migrant numbers than we saw under the Obama administration. It was a crisis, and it was happening under Trump. And Trump was no friend to these migrants, as he said, build a wall, they're criminals. But now here we are with Biden, and the numbers have doubled again. And so now we've got an even bigger crisis. They do not know what to do with all of these people. They are turning some of the people away. They're not turning the kids away. They're bringing in some of the adults. They are allowing some to claim asylum and wanting that asylum status in the United States. But this is a mess, guys. It is a real mess. And these Border Patrol agents are overwhelmed. The immigration people, everybody, the immigration officers, everybody's overwhelmed down there. And part of it is Biden saying, you know, we're going to reverse Trump. You know, Biden kind of did what Trump did. Trump got into office, and what did Trump do? I'm going to reverse everything Obama did. And then Biden gets into office and he basically says the same thing. I'm going to reverse everything Trump did. And that was a bit of a mistake, considering we are in a pandemic. And of course, which I think I've been saying this for a year, but of course, the people hit the hardest were the poor. And absolutely, they would flee in mass to a place where they thought they would have more opportunity. You take a place that was already crushed, a place that already had low opportunity, already lots of gang violence, already tons of poverty, and you make it worse by shutting down the global economy. And what do you think is going to happen? They're going to show up at the U.S. border, and they're going to show up en masse, and it's going to be more than we've ever seen, ever. And that is exactly what has happened. So it's not just the Biden administration changing his policies, but a lot of it right now has to do with the fact that much of the world was thrown into starvation level poverty because of the pandemic. Because many people, and you know, if you've been watching this show for a long time, I have been very against the lockdowns. This has been one of the reasons, because I knew this would hit the poor, that not everybody has the luxury of sitting at home in front of their computer working. That not everybody has the luxury of online classes for their children, that not everybody has that luxury, you know, especially the people they were doing all of that while they were ordering their Grubhub from the mom who has to load her kids up into the car because she can't leave them at home, and she's delivering your Grubhub while you're sitting at home, sheltering in place. You know, it was only for the privileged who could do that. And it was worse for the people in these poor countries. They were already suffering. They were already dealing with drought and famine and poverty, and the pandemic and the global economy that they heavily relied on shut down. Much of those Northern Triangle, that's coffee. Well, how many people were out going to Starbucks during the pandemic? How many people have been active because you're not going to work? So if you're not going to work, you're not ordering Starbucks. You're not drinking as much coffee, perhaps. But the sales went down and these people started to crumble. So we're seeing this sort of pile on, that is piled on, that is then piled on this group of people. And so, of course, we're seeing now double the numbers from an already crisis level of numbers under the Trump administration. We're now seeing double that at our southern border. So the big question is, what are we going to do from this point forward? And, you know, it's not a very straightforward, easy answer. I mean, look, Biden reversing the Remain in Mexico policy, it's, you know, definitely the United States has more money to handle them than Mexico. Mexico has some, Mexico can do some, but the United States has more, and the United States can do more. But we're not going to solve this problem in that Northern Triangle. We're not going to solve this problem until we as a country own the fact that we have been very much involved in the detriment of those countries. And it's not just during the 1800s and early 1900s of the banana republics. It's not just during the 1950s through the 80s, the Cold War, the obsession against the USSR. But a lot of it is we ourselves did this during this pandemic when we shut everybody down and we told them that their economies were going to tank because we weren't going to buy their coffee anymore. And then, oh, well, you know what? But it's better than dying from a virus, right? No, I'm sorry. Actually, dying from gang violence the way that they do is worse. And we have just exacerbated it. So that is what's really going on at that southern border. And I think we all need to be aware of it. I don't know the answer on how we fix it. This is a crisis. Hopefully, and I think they are. I'm sure the Biden administration is attempting to do something. I think the same way the Trump administration was attempting to do something. I defended Trump during this time, and I'm defending Biden during this time. When Trump was dealing with it, I saw the numbers. They were double. They were under the Obama administration. He had double the people showing up at the border. So when people were criticizing him on, oh my gosh, they're just having him sleep on the floor and they're in cages and it's like, look, there was double the people that showed up. What are you going to do with them? You don't have facilities for that. And now here we are again, another doubling of that number has shown up at the border. This is a very difficult crisis to have to manage. I'm glad I'm not the one in charge of it, but all I can do is raise awareness as to why we got here and maybe hope that in the future, rather than making the situation worse, we stop and we think not of ourselves wanting to eat bananas, not of ourselves wanting to stop the Soviets, not of ourselves wanting to shelter in place from a virus, but maybe we start to think about how those mentalities have a ripple effect across the globe and what it does to others, and then how it comes back at us. And quite frankly, a lot of this is our responsibility. So I think we might have to help clean it up. And that is going to be a long, drawn-out process. And I hope in the meantime, we don't make it worse.